Today, November 22nd, is the Feast of St. Cecilia. And as you know, our cathedral here in Omaha is dedicated to St. Cecilia, and she's our patroness of the Archdiocese. And I had the privilege to serve at the cathedral parish for the first 5 years of my priesthood. So I'd like to tell a story this morning that I had heard there in regard to the Last Judgment. It goes back, the cathedral started being built back in 1907, and it would continue until 1959. So it took 52 years to build the cathedral church. It was a matter of dollars, as often is the case in how it would be constructed. Today, it's one of the 10 largest cathedrals in the United States. But after World War II, construction on the cathedral moved along more rapidly than before. And as they got in the interior of the church, above the altar in the front, in the dome area, they wanted to have a special painting. And so they decided that there would be a large painting of Christ the Judge right over the altar that everyone could see. Well, once it was painted, the people had a reaction. And if you read the cathedral history book, the painting is described as, quote, having monumental proportion. This did not go well. It was a dramatic painting of Jesus on the throne, surrounded by angels, and the backdrop, the clouds of heaven. The history book says one other line, and it says it all. The reaction of the parishioners was this: liked by some, disliked by many more. The dome was repainted in 1952 with St. Cecilia as the central figure. In other words, people, and I remember talking to people about this, they said he was looking at us, he was glaring at us, he was so stern, we were so afraid. So they got a painting of St. Cecilia. She was very small and very gentle and kind. Well, and today, you may know, the latest renovation of the cathedral, they painted over St. Cecilia. Now they just got some nice ribs up there and that. But I haven't ever forgotten that story because it tells us much about our understanding of the judgment, the second judgment, the final judgment. As you and I know, when we die, it's the first judgment, it's the personal judgment. But as we hear through scriptures, there's a final judgment for the living and the dead, understood as the end of time. That's why our window, this church is focused on that round window. As you look back and you see it, it says, at the end of time, as St. Paul says, God in all in God, God in all in God. It all comes together in God. And for you and me today, as we celebrate this feast of Jesus Christ, the King, for us, it's to be aware of how he's been revealed, and he wants us to be aware of himself as a judge for us. Now, there are some people who, very much like the people of St. Cecilia's, they didn't like that judge being so severe. They were fearful, said, oh my gosh, I'll never get to heaven. Someone who looks so fierce and demanding. There's others, and I find a lot more of this, who say, oh, you don't have to worry about it all. Everybody's going to heaven. You don't have to worry about that last judgment. Well, in between there, today's gospel gives us the guide to understand Jesus Christ as our judge. We hear today in the gospel, very simply, Jesus uses the image. Sitting on the throne, it'll be as different as sheep from goats in terms of being judged. And what's the basis? We heard it so well. How do we respond to someone who's hungry or thirsty? How do we respond to someone who's a stranger? We don't know. How's someone who's naked or just in need, not only of clothing, but whatever it might be, ill, and we just act as if we don't see them? Or in prison, unable to do what they would be able to do. His words to us today is the guide for us understanding Jesus Christ, the judge. Whatever you did for one of these least brothers of mine, you did for me. Now, if we were to talk with each other today, many of us would probably say, you know, that judgment, that's far in the future. It's hard to know. It is very hard to know. That is of God. And everyone's got their opinion. Something is going to happen this week or this year, or so forth. But much more importantly, we are to be aware, how are we living for the judgment of Jesus? You know, we don't have a glaring Jesus coming down upon us. But we're invited to be aware, how are we responding to the needs of others as our guide for judgment? And think about it. Think about how every day you meet someone, or maybe it isn't so much meeting them, but think about how many people in this city right now, today, November 22nd, don't have a meal being provided for them at home. Why is it that our shelters across the city, our pantries, more than ever requests? Why is it that those shelters that provide overnight accommodations are growing in number? They're trying to expand, and there's much generosity. And that's part of us responding to those needs. How about the people we know that are shut in at this time? Assisted living, nursing, skilled facilities, or maybe it's just simply that neighbor in the apartment next door, down the street, or someone we just know that really is kind of by themselves. This is the way you and I are going to be judged. How we respond to the needs of those around us. It isn't going to be just how do we take care of ourselves. Yes, many of us have family responsibilities, and that's very important. But we teach our children and our grandchildren how we are always noticing others. We're not always focused on ourselves, because then we'll have a healthy sense of the judgment, the final judgment, the second judgment. And it'll be much more what we hear in the first reading, where the shepherd takes care of his sheep, where God invites us home and gathers us into his arms. And that will be the blessing of heaven.